John lingered in the great hall of Newcastle well into the late hours, long after most of Lord Wyman's household had retired. The torches burned low, and the hearth crackled and spat, sending a flicker of shifting shadows across the tapestries. He was weary from days of hard riding, from the skirmish with Bolton raiders, from the weight of so many decisions. Yet a taut energy still thrummed in his veins, keeping him awake and restless. A servant came by to feed the dying fire, prodding the embers with a long iron poker. John murmured thanks, sipping what remained of his wine in small, thoughtful swallows. Ghost dozed on the cool stones nearby, occasionally lifting his head at the smallest sound. Outside, beyond these walls, White Harbor slumbered under the grip of a harsh winter. The city's bustle was muted, its docks half frozen. But in the heart of Newcastle, a quiet revolution had begun. House Manderley, the richest port lords of the north, had cast aside all hesitation to join John's cause, pledging men and ships to free the land of Roose Bolton's tyranny. It was a victory that only a fortnight ago seemed distant and uncertain. Now it was the hinge upon which the future turned. John rose from his seat. His limbs ached, half from old wounds and half from days spent in an unforgiving saddle. He draped his black cloak more tightly around his shoulders and stepped out into the corridor. The servant hurried to guide him through the keep's winding passages. Even within these walls, warmth was scarce, the air chilly enough to wreathe each breath in white. Tapestries depicting sea monsters and merlings fluttered faintly in the drafts. John's boots resounded on the stone floor, echoing back to him. Yet for all the gloom, the corridors held a measure of stately grandeur. Soft carpets muffled some footsteps, and brass braziers glowed intermittently, fed by dutiful pages. He found Lord Wyman in a smaller solar, where a handful of silver lamps lent a ghostly glow to the room. A large wooden table cluttered with maps and ledgers dominated the space, and behind it, Lord Wyman sat in a sturdy chair carved with the figure of a merman. Two of his most trusted advisors stood to the side, conferring in hushed voices. Wyman looked up as John entered and waved him over, beckoning with one thick-fingered hand. "Come, your grace," the lord said, that last phrase rich with cautious respect. "I know you must be exhausted, but we have matters to settle before you depart on the morrow." John inclined his head, stepping closer. "I appreciate your willingness to meet so late. These matters can't wait, I agree." Wyman tapped a spot on one of the maps. "Here is the White Knife, here is White Harbor, and beyond to the north, Winterfell. My scouts tell me Roose Bolton's men have concentrated around Moat Cailin and parts of the western roads, but we've also had scattered reports of Bolton riders near the Saltspear and the marshlands of the Neck. Some of these outriders appear to be hunting any loyalist lords. Others harass travelers they suspect of supporting you." John nodded grimly. "We fought a band of them not 2 days past, outside a burning hamlet. It seems Roose Bolton is as cruel and methodical as Ramsay was mad. He wants the north to cower, to ensure no one dares lend me their banners." A pained look passed across Wyman's round face. "Aye, House Bolton has always been cunning, even if the son was brazen. The father is quiet, measured, and deadly." He pressed both palms on the table's edge, as though the weight of memory rested on him. "I will not pretend this war will be easy, even with White Harbor's strength. The Lannisters might do little while winter tightens its grip, but if we drag this conflict beyond the cold months, they may well send southern armies north or funnel gold to Bolton's cause." John's stomach churned. Each step forward revealed new perils. "We can't wait for spring, nor can we let Bolton entrench. I plan to return to Winterfell and coordinate an offensive. We have the Umbers at the last hearth, Lady Alice Karstark working to reclaim Carhold, Daisy Mormont heading back to Bear Island. Once the Mormonts land or march, they'll converge. Roose's best chance is to pick us off before we gather. We must stay ahead of him." Wyman's brows lowered thoughtfully. "I'll send ravens to my bannermen tonight. We can muster 1,000 spears within a week if the roads remain passable. Another 1,000 in 2 weeks more, though that second muster might get bogged down by heavy snows. As for ships, The Bay of Seals is treacherous in winter, but we can manage some supply runs if we must. If White Harbor's fleet can ferry some forces up the coast, we might threaten Bolton from two sides. But that would be a gamble. John's gaze flicked across the maps, lingering on the coastline. Bear Island's warriors are planning to push from the west. If you were to send ships north, we might coordinate with the Mormonts, land near Deepwood Motte, then strike east. Meanwhile, the main body of your troops marches on Winterfell to join the rest. Together, we can trap Roos's forces between two armies. Or if needed, we pivot and strike at the Dreadfort. One of Wyman's advisors, a tall man with streaks of white in his hair, stepped forward. My lord, that's a bold plan, but we must consider that the seas could freeze near the stony shore, or storms could scatter the fleet. Also, if Bolton's men hold Moat Cailin, the march from White Harbor to Winterfell might be contested. Wyman looked to John, letting silence stretch for a moment. We'll do what we can. Let me not promise what can't be delivered, but trust we'll try. If the weather cooperates, we'll open a maritime front. In the meantime, my main host shall travel overland. John inclined his head. That's more than I hoped for already. They spoke late into the night, finalizing details of ravens to be sent at dawn. Wyman insisted on drafting official letters affirming House Manderley's fealty to John Stark, referencing Ned Stark's bloodline and Robb Stark's will as the source of rightful rule. John noticed Wyman had not used the word bastard once in conversation. Some subtle courtesy, or perhaps a sincere acceptance of John's new station. The letters would circulate among lesser lords sworn to White Harbor, urging them to gather at once. John could almost feel the realm shifting beneath his feet, ancient lines rearranging themselves to restore House Stark's place in the north. At last, well past midnight, John excused himself. Lord Wyman gave him a solemn nod, and the two parted with an unspoken sense that great events were in motion. John returned to the chamber provided for him and found Sam inside, poring over yet another battered tome by the light of a single candle. Sam looked up with a sleepy smile. "John," he said, marking his page with a ribbon of cloth. "Did you speak with Lord Wyman? Is all well?" John shed his cloak and dropped heavily onto a small stool. "We have a strategy. Lord Wyman's men will muster, and they'll march or sail. With any luck, we'll have enough force to challenge Bolton before he can destroy the rest of our allies." Sam nodded, pushing his round cheeks into a hopeful expression. "That's good. And then, the wall?" A pang of guilt tugged at John. "Yes, then the wall." He sighed, massaging his eyes with his thumb and forefinger. "I won't forget Marsh's letter. The others won't wait. But until we ensure the Boltons can't disrupt everything from behind, we can't commit a proper force to the watch." Sam exhaled softly. "I understand. One step at a time." John glanced at the tome on Sam's lap. "What were you reading?" Sam brightened, smoothing a hand over the worn cover. "It's from the Manderley Library. Maester Theomore compiled local histories. There's a reference to a hidden fishing village on the coast near White Harbor that was once used as a safe harbor for northern armies centuries ago. Maybe we could store supplies there out of Bolton's reach, if we needed to evacuate or stage a surprise landing." John smiled faintly. "Your thirst for knowledge is never sated, is it?" He sighed, letting gratitude seep into his voice. "I'm glad you're here, Sam. Rest up. Tomorrow we ride for Winterfell. We can't linger longer than we must." Sam carefully placed a scrap of cloth to mark his spot. "I'll get some sleep then. You should too." They retired, each to his own corner of the chamber. Ghost curled near the door, a silent guard. John finally let exhaustion overtake him. In his dreams, he stood on an ice-crusted battlefield, hearing the howling of dire wolves mingle with the roar of wind. A shadowy figure loomed at the edge of vision, a man with pale, lifeless eyes. Around them, shapes of the dead rose from drifts of snow. John tried to run, but his feet sank deeper into the frost. A fierce cold stabbed at his lungs. Then, in a burst of flame, a direwolf's shape lunged at the darkness, and everything vanished. He woke in the dim gray of early dawn, breath tight in his chest. Sam was already stirring, packing their few belongings. Outside, church bells from the nearby sept told a low, sonorous note. Servants had come to stoke the hearth in the corridor. John dressed quickly, buckling on his sword belt, rolling his shoulders to test the stiffness in his muscles. It was time to depart. The longer he tarried, the more precarious the situation at Winterfell could become. They emerged to find the courtyard abustle. Manderly men were preparing wagons, loading salted fish, sacks of grain, and barrels of fresh water. Snow swirled lightly, drifting from a pale sky. John's companions, Ser Arwood, the wildling named Branven, the steward Gillum, and the rest, were already waiting with the horses. The woman who had fled Bolton's terror some days back was also there, though she looked uncertain. She approached hesitantly. "My lord," she said softly, though it was still strange for John to be called that. "Will you allow me to stay in White Harbor?" The Manderly Knights said I could find a place here, maybe help in the kitchens or the stables. "I'm too afraid to face more battles." John regarded her kindly. "You don't need my permission. You've seen horrors enough. If you want to remain, you have every right. Lord Wyman is a good man. You'll be safer here." She managed a trembling smile. "Thank you, and thank you for everything. I never thought I'd meet a Stark." She dipped into a ragged curtsy, then hurried off, as though overwhelmed by the swirl of events. John's men had already mounted. Sam found his old mare, adjusting the girth awkwardly. He had never been a natural horseman, but he did his best. Ghost padded in circles, tail swishing, anxious to move. The gates swung open with a loud creak, and John glimpsed the streets of White Harbor, the tall houses, and beyond that the gray sea. With a final farewell to Lord Wyman's household, they rode out, a compact party headed north by northeast. The outer ward parted for them with low murmurs, some men cheering, some saluting with raised pikes. John led the column across the drawbridge, past the city's winding roads, and through the great gates that separated White Harbor from the rest of the north. They did not travel unescorted. At Lord Wyman's insistence, a small detachment of Manderly cavalry, perhaps 30 strong, joined them, partly to deter any Bolton ambush, partly to facilitate urgent communication once John reached Winterfell. As they trotted through the outlying farmland, John could see the toll of winter. Fields lay fallow, patches of ice coated the irrigation ditches, and gaunt-faced farmers watched from doorways. Nevertheless, there was relief in some eyes at the sight of Manderly banners riding with a Stark. It took 2 days to retrace their route, but this time they avoided the hamlets where the Bolton raiders had struck. The Manderly scouts guided them around trouble, skirting potential conflict. Even so, tension hovered in every rider's posture. At night, they took turns standing guard, eyes scanning for silhouettes against the moonlit snow. Each morning, they pressed on without lingering. John's thoughts fixated on Winterfell. Would Tormund and Moor's Umber have repelled any threat? Had Alice Karstark departed for Karhold already? Would they need immediate reinforcements? On the second dusk, the group took shelter in a ruin of an old tower overshadowing a bend in the White Knife. Sam rummaged through his notes by the campfire, humming thoughtfully. John walked the perimeter of the camp, checking the sentries. The Manderly Knights, who were more used to a city's comforts, did their best to hide complaints about the cold. One of them, a young squire, nearly lost a toe to frostbite that morning but was able to keep it with quick warming in hot water. John recognized anew how unkind the northern roads could be, especially for southern-born men or anyone unaccustomed to deep winter. That night, Ghost growled in the dark, but no threat emerged. It was enough to keep everyone awake, hearts pounding. When dawn broke, they moved quickly, crossing frozen streams and weaving through half-buried glens. The closer they came to Winterfell, the deeper the snow seemed. Then, at midday, the silhouette of the ancient castle appeared through blowing drifts of white, a dark shape of towers and battlements rising against the wintry sky. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, and the banners atop the walls bore the gray direwolf. No fresh sign of battle was apparent from the distance. John's relief was palpable. They approached by the main road, crossing the old outer grounds. A watchman on the walls called out, and the gates swung open. Men in stark livery, though in truth they were Umbers, Karstarks, and Wildlings, stood to greet them. Jon noted the tension in their faces' ease when they recognized him and the Manderly banners at his back. They rode inside to the courtyard, dismounting stiffly. The place was still battered from the assault that had ousted Ramsay. Walls blackened by siege fire, a broken catapult half buried in snow. But it was alive. The yard bustled with scurrying stewards, foragers returning with meager supplies, and archers in battered cloaks practicing near the range. Jon felt a wash of pride and sorrow. Winterfell might be wounded, but it was undeniably in Stark hands. He was greeted first by Ed Tollett, the doleful man who had once served under Jon at the Wall. Ed wore a thick black cloak that nearly hid his new Stark badge. "Jon," Ed said wearily, "thank the gods you've returned. The Boltons have been quiet, but we've had wild rumors of a muster near the Dreadfort. Mors has been pacing about like a caged bear." Jon clasped his shoulder. "I've brought Manderly men. Lord Wyman pledges more to come. How fare things here?" Ed's expression was somewhere between a grimace and a shrug. "We're holding together, just about. Tormund's been restless. He led a small band out a week ago to chase some rumored Bolton riders. Came back with bruises and curses. No major engagements, though. Lady Alice left for Carhold days ago. Mors wanted to send more men with her, but she insisted the smaller the group, the less suspicion. No word yet on whether she succeeded." Jon's mind whirled. "Has Roose Bolton tried anything else?" "No direct attack. Maybe he's waiting for the roads to worsen, or for us to starve. We've had plenty of refugees arrive. We feed them as best we can. We set them to work, mostly clearing rubble or forging arrowheads if they have any skill. I don't know how we'll feed them all." Jon nodded. Hunger was a grim threat, overshadowed only by the Boltons' capacity for violence. "I'll want a council meeting soon. Tell Mors and the other leaders. For now, let's get the Manderly men settled in the courtyard or the stables if there's space." They trudged through the churned snow, making arrangements. Sam parted to check on the meager library and speak with the healers about the wounded. Jon discovered Tormund in the great hall, half drunk on sour ale, entertaining a cluster of Umbers with tall tales of giant slaying. The wildling wore a patched cloak of bear fur and roared with laughter when Jon appeared. "There's the Crow King," Tormund bellowed, standing up so quickly his cup spilled. "You took your time. That fishlord feed you up good? You look a little plumper." He poked Jon's midsection, earning an indulgent glare in return. Jon felt a flicker of amusement. "Lord Wyman is no fishlord. He's a man of the north, Tormund, and he stands with us. I bring word that White Harbor men will soon march or sail to reinforce us." Tormund's eyes lit, though he tried to hide it behind a boisterous shrug. "Good, because I'm tired of this sitting around, waiting for a fight that never comes. The Umbers are ready, too. They keep asking me about the best way to flay a flayed man. I told them the trick is not to let the bastard breathe." Jon arched a brow. "I'd prefer we show a bit more mercy if they surrender. We need not become the monsters we hate." Tormund chuckled, but his gaze carried a note of understanding. "You're a better man than me, Snow. A real king, perhaps. But if the Boltons cross us again, I'll do what must be done. None of their men will get off easy." Before Jon could respond, Mors Umber entered, looming over the lesser men in the hall. His thick beard was iced at the edges, and he clutched a half-eaten chunk of bread. "Jon," he greeted. "Good you're back. White Harbor, we need them. I suspect Bolton's waiting to see if he can lure houses to him, or else he's just building strength. My outriders spotted signs of a large force mustering near the Dreadfort." Jon nodded, beckoning Mors closer so they could speak in lower tones. "Lord Wyman has allied with us fully. We must plan our next move. If Bolton is waiting at the Dreadfort or near Moat Cailin, we might want to provoke him, force his hand. But we can't be reckless." Mors tore off another piece of bread with his teeth. "Aye, then let's gather the lords. You, me, Tormund, Sam if he has sense to bring. The council chamber is still battered, but it'll do. Jon allowed himself a wry thought. Ned Stark's old solar, or the original council room, had once been so peaceful, a place for winter budgets and harvest tallies. Now it would be the nerve center of a war. He motioned for Tormund to follow, and together, they left the great hall, ascending the keep's interior steps toward the corridor that led to the old council chamber. The wind whistled outside arrow slits, carrying specks of snow. The chamber itself was partially repaired since the battle. Some shattered furniture had been replaced with rough-made tables and stools. A new map of the north lay pinned to one table with daggers at each corner to keep it flat. A brazier glowed in the corner, providing precious warmth. One by one, the key figures arrived. Mors Umber, a representative from the Glovers who had turned up days ago with a small retinue, 2 wildling leaders who served under Tormund, and a few knights from smaller northern houses. Not all seats were filled. Alice was gone, Dacy Mormont hadn't returned, and the Serwins had not yet named a new head after the miseries inflicted by the Boltons. Nevertheless, enough bodies had gathered to constitute a war council. Jon took a seat at the head of the table. Ghost prowled inside, found a spot near the brazier, and curled up. The men eyed the dire wolf nervously, but Ghost was a familiar sight to many by now. "We have news," Jon began, voice carrying authority that still felt both alien and necessary. "House Manderly stands with us. In a fortnight or so, we can expect more than 1,000 men to march or sail for Winterfell. Meanwhile, Bear Island musters. Under the Mormonts, the Umbers have begun gathering more riders from the last hearth. The Karstarks remain in question, but Lady Alice is attempting to secure their loyalty as we speak. With luck, we can double our current numbers before too long." A hum of interest swept the room. Mors grunted approval. One of the wildling leaders, a grizzled fighter named Harith, asked in a thick accent, "You plan to meet Bolton out in the fields, or you plan a siege of his keep?" Jon's gaze flicked to the map. "We need to decide. Bolton holds the Dreadfort, an ancient fortress with strong walls. A siege could be dangerous in winter both for them and for us. They might have enough stored supplies to outlast us, and I won't risk starving my men or freezing them in tents. Another possibility is to lure Bolton into attacking us here at Winterfell, but that invites a siege upon us. Our stores aren't infinite either. Alternatively, we can try to meet him in open battle on ground of our choosing." Mors leaned forward, bracing his big hands on the table. "Meeting him in open battle might favor us if we have the numbers. But Bolton's no fool. He'll fight only on terms that give him advantage, or he'll try to outmaneuver us with his knowledge of the land. The Umbers have a bone to pick with the Boltons, though, and I'd gladly match them spear for spear." The Glover man, whose name was Gilwood, spoke up. "Roose Bolton is cunning. I served under him briefly at the start of the War of the Five Kings, before the phrase betrayed Robb. He is not overly proud or prone to charge headlong into a trap. He'd sooner starve us or pick off small forces. That's what we should fear. He might let us gather an army, then launch swift raids to cut our supply lines, avoiding a pitched battle until we're weak." Jon studied the map. White Harbor was on the eastern coast, Bear Island far to the northwest, the Dreadfort to the northeast, with Carhold further still. Winterfell sat near the center of the north-southern half, crucial for whichever side wanted to hold power. "We'll gather enough men so he can't pick us apart easily," Jon said. "When the Manderly host arrives, we'll have a strong central force here. We'll also coordinate with Dacy Mormont's approach from the west, if the seas allow. If Bolton tries to starve us, we can send out parties to forage. But that only works if we maintain control of the surrounding area." Tormund folded his arms, letting out a low chuckle. "Reminds me of fighting the Thens in the Frostfangs. They tried to cut off our food. We survived on roots and snow hair. You Kneelers might not enjoy that diet." A faint ripple of amusement broke the tension. Jon allowed himself a slight smile. "Let's hope we find better fare than snow hair. For now, the priority is to ensure that every ally house can reach Winterfell with minimal harassment. We'll send out advanced scouting patrols to secure the roads. The Bolton outriders can't keep setting villages ablaze." He looked to Moors. We'll need more men skilled in stealth and tracking. Tormund's wildlings have experience, but we can't stretch them too thin. Perhaps the Umbers have scouts used to winter hunts. Moors nodded. We do. I'll gather a band of them. They'll roam a perimeter around Winterfell, driving off or killing any Bolton riders they catch. But if we meet a large force, we'll have to fall back. Jon accepted that with a tilt of his head. Wise. Engage only if the enemy is small. Avoid being captured. He paused, letting silence settle. We must also prepare for the possibility that Roose might attempt a direct approach from Moat Cailin. If the snows aren't too deep, he could bring a sizable force. If so, we either meet him on the open field, somewhere around the King's Road, or we hold fast within Winterfell's walls. The second option could become a siege. The first might turn disastrous if we choose our ground poorly. Gilwood Glover rubbed a calloused hand across the stubble on his chin. If we can guess his route, we might prepare an ambush, like crossing the King's Road or near one of the fords on the White Knife. But Bolton might see that coming. Jon's gaze shifted to Tormund. Your men beyond the wall used to ambush larger forces with cunning and knowledge of the terrain. We might learn from that. Hit Bolton's vanguard, lure them into a trap, then withdraw before they can retaliate. Tormund spread his hands. Sure, we can do that if the land suits us. Woods, slopes, gullies. Hard to find in this flat country. But there are some hills northwest of here, near the Barrow Fields, if I recall. We'll see. Discussions continued well into the evening. Messengers came and went, bringing small scraps of news from distant hamlets. One carried a missive from Lady Barbary Dustin at Barrowton, ambiguous in its promise of cooperation, but containing at least a polite acknowledgement of Jon's claim. Another report said that a group of travelers from Deepwood Motte had safely reached Winterfell, some swearing fealty in the name of the lost King Robb. Bit by bit, the north stirred. Eventually, the council broke. The men drifted off to their tasks or to find what little rest they could. Jon paced for a while in the corridor, Ghost at his side, reflecting on the gravity of it all. For every stride forward, there remained 1,000 uncertainties. He found himself standing near a tall window, looking out upon the courtyard and the white beyond. The crisp night sky sparkled with stars. Winter's hush enveloped the land, a quiet prelude to the storms yet to come. When he returned to the great hall, he saw Tormund had not resumed drinking. Instead, the wildling leader lingered near a corner, speaking in low tones with a pair of his clansmen. Jon approached, curious. Tormund clapped one man on the shoulder, sending him away, then turned to Jon with a serious expression rarely seen. We've got word from some of my folk who stayed near the Gift, south of the wall. They say the dead are stirring again. Not in huge numbers, but enough that the Night's Watch is on edge. You see, snow. The real enemy creeps closer while we squabble over crowns. Jon felt the chill, deeper than winter's cold. I know. As soon as we deal with Bolton, we must shift our attention north. If we survive the Boltons only to be overrun by the Whites, it will all be in vain. Tormund's gruff face softened momentarily. If it were up to me, we'd ride for the wall now. But I see your point. If the Boltons stab us in the back while we fight the others, we lose everything. Just don't forget what's coming. I won't, Jon promised. They shared a somber look, then parted ways. Jon needed rest. Tomorrow would bring more duties, more decisions. He found his way to a small set of chambers that served as his quarters. It had been tidied up since his departure. A rough-hewn table, a chair, a bed with furs. Ghost flopped down near the embers of a brazier. Jon set aside his sword belt, ran a hand through his dark hair, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep came swiftly, filled with dreams of swirling snow, the thunder of marching armies, and a distant, icy wind that chilled his bones even in the safe warmth of furs. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. The Manderley contingent that had ridden with Jon was preparing to return east, carrying letters, requests, and instructions. Lord Wyman Manderley wanted daily ravens once they established better lines of communication. Jon wrote a careful missive outlining Winterfell's condition, the alliances forming, and the plan to gather enough men to challenge Bolton. He stressed urgency. The messenger packed these letters in a leather pouch, sealed with a dire wolf crest. John made sure Sam wrote a second letter, full of details for White Harbor's maesters about the healing of frostbite and the need for certain herbs. Overseeing such mundane tasks felt oddly comforting, a respite from the looming violence. Before the Manderley riders departed, John thanked them personally for their service. One night, Ser Kenric bent his knee, declaring that when next they saw each other, he hoped to present the banners of additional lesser lords who had joined. John could only hope the man's optimism proved justified. Meanwhile, Tormund sent some wildlings to the outskirts of Winterfell with instructions to break up any pockets of Bolton stragglers terrorizing nearby farms. Mors Umber likewise dispatched a handful of his scouts to the north. John circulated through the courtyard, offering words of encouragement. He stopped by a corner where an armorer was forging arrowheads, the clang of metal echoing. The armorer paused to bow as John approached. Many of the men were still unaccustomed to calling him Your Grace, and that suited John fine. He never yearned for a crown, only for the salvation of his people. But he had begun to accept that the symbol of leadership mattered to them, as much as it once chafed him. Amid the swirl of responsibilities, John felt a powerful pull to visit the crypts. He had avoided them long enough. Duty might swallow every moment, but he owed something to the memory of Ned Stark, his father in all but blood, and to Robb, whose will had placed him on this path. That afternoon, when the sky was leaden with clouds and the courtyard was thick with men hauling supplies, John slipped away. Ghost followed at his heel, silent as a shadow. The entrance to the crypts lay near the statue of a direwolf carved into the ground, a narrow stair descending beneath the castle. Darkness swallowed them as they made their way down, the thick cold air tightening around John's lungs. He lit a torch from a small sconce and continued, each footstep echoing in the gloom. Ghost's claws clicked on the worn stones. At length, he reached the row of tombs where his ancestors lay. There sat the statues of lords long past, carved with solemn faces, stone direwolves at their feet, swords across their laps. Ned Stark's tomb stood apart, humble, but no less daunting. John paused, swallowing hard. The statue's likeness was only approximate. Ned's face had been gentler, though the artists tried to capture his quiet strength. A small, stony silhouette of an iron sword lay across Ned's lap. John remembered hearing that the swords were placed to keep vengeful spirits at rest, an old tradition. He knelt, heartbeat thick in his ears. For so long, he had yearned to be recognized by this man's name, to belong to the family he loved. Yet life had shaped him differently. He inhaled, stirring the torch's flame. "Father," he whispered, voice catching, "I'm sorry. I never wished for this crown or to leave the watch. But I hope you'd understand why I had to do it." The crypt offered no reply but a distant drip of water. Ghost remained at John's side, head bowed as if sensing the gravity of the moment. John bowed his head too. "I remember everything you taught me," he murmured, voice barely above the hush of darkness. "Honor, duty, protect those who cannot protect themselves. I will, even if it costs me dearly." He gazed at the statue's face, memory flooding in. The day Ned Stark parted from him at Winterfell's courtyard, promising they would speak about John's mother next time they met. That talk never came to pass. Ned died in King's Landing. Was it truly his mother's blood that made him a Targaryen, as some rumors suggested? John had half denied those rumors even to himself. He felt more Stark than anything else. Perhaps in the end, it did not matter. He was Ned's son in heart and soul. He stayed there a time, letting grief coil quietly inside him. Then he slowly rose, torch casting flickering light on the carved walls. He moved further down the crypt to the new tomb built for Robb. It was smaller than Ned's, simpler, lacking the centuries of tradition. A stone effigy of Robb had been hastily carved, capturing a fraction of his likeness. Broad shoulders, a wolf's pelt about them, and the face of a youth who died too soon. There was no crown on the statue. The men who carved it never had a chance to see Robb crowned in person. Still, the presence of that tomb struck John with an ache he could hardly contain. He placed a hand on the stone figure's shoulder. "I wish you were here, Robb," he whispered. "I wish you were king instead of me. I'd follow you to the ends of the realm." He clenched his jaw, remembering the joy in Robb's laughter, the brightness of his eyes as a boy. He recalled the letter naming John his heir. "I'll try to be worthy of your choice. The North still needs you, and if I can keep your memory alive, I will." Ghost whined softly, a mournful sound in the silence. John dipped his head once more, then turned away, mindful that the living still required him more than the dead. Ascending the steps, each footstep felt heavier with the knowledge that he was the last hope of House Stark's legacy. If he failed, their line might vanish from Winterfell forever, replaced by the flayed man of House Bolton or some other usurper. He would not allow that. Emerging into the gray daylight, John saw that a small crowd had gathered near the southern gate. He recognized Tormund's copper hair, Morza's hulking figure, and a handful of others. Intrigued, he quickened his pace, rejoining them to find a trio of riders slumped in their saddles. Their cloaks were ragged with frost, their horses flecked with sweat and ice. One of the men nearly collapsed as he dismounted. Another struggled to keep his seat, clutching a bandaged arm. "Who are they?" John asked, stepping forward, concern evident in his tone. Tormund jerked his chin at the newcomers. "Scouts from the west. They say they came from around the Saltspear and the Barrow Fields. Looks like they've had a rough time." One of the scouts, a middle-aged man with a deep scar across his cheek, sank to his knees, trembling from cold and exhaustion. "Your Grace," he croaked, gazing up at John. We found a large Bolton force, maybe 400-500 men, led by that bastard's boys or some of his father's captains. They're heading this way, burning villages on the Barrow Fields. We tried to harass them, but..." His voice broke. "There are too many. They cut us off, killed half our men. We barely escaped." A hush fell on the onlookers. John set a steadying hand on the scout's shoulder. "You did your duty. You warned us. Rest now. We'll see you tended to." He gestured to a steward. "Get these men food and a place to warm themselves. Summon the healers." The scout nodded weakly. Another coughed, spitting flecks of blood, and Tormund helped him dismount. The men looked half-dead already. Bolton's cruelty was unrelenting, and if they truly had a host of several hundred men moving across the Barrow Fields, that might be a vanguard or an advanced raiding party. The distance from the Barrow Fields to Winterfell was not too great. They could arrive in a handful of days if they pressed on. Mors joined John, brows knotted in anger. "Roose must sense we're gathering strength, so he sends a force to scorch the land between us, or to provoke us into a premature engagement. Damn him." John weighed the possibilities. If we leave them unchecked, they'll kill innocents, weaken our supply lines, and maybe lure out a part of our army they can defeat in detail. We can't ignore them, but we can't risk our entire host in an open field if this is a feint. Mors flexed a massive hand. "A feint or not, they're ravaging the Barrow Fields. We have to do something. The men are restless. They want to strike back." Tormund spat on the snow. "Let's ride out with enough men to crush them, then come back with their heads. Show Bolton we aren't cowering behind these walls." John paused, mind racing. Every fiber of him wanted to ride out, to put an end to the slaughter. But he remembered the caution from Gilwood Glover. Bolton might be trying to bait them into a trap. How many men can we spare for a sortie without leaving Winterfell vulnerable? We might muster 200 or 300 if we gather quickly. That could be enough to challenge an enemy of 400 or 500 if we strike with surprise. But if Bolton has more hidden nearby, we'll be overrun. Mors scowled. "You can't live in fear of traps. War is risk. If we let them burn the Barrow Fields unopposed, we look weak." John pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the weight of command. "We'll do this. Gather a vanguard of 200. We'll ride out tomorrow at first light, taking a route that keeps us hidden as long as possible. If the enemy truly has only 400 or so, we might stand a chance of ambushing them instead. But I won't commit every fighter. Winterfell must still be defended. Tormund grinned fiercely. I like it. Let me lead the first wave. No one ambushes quite like free folk. Mors, though not always a friend of the wildlings, gave a curt nod. And Umbers will lead the second wave. All right, Snow. I'll see to the muster. We'll pick men who can ride well and fight in the snow. We'll leave enough behind to hold the castle. Jon exhaled, meeting their gazes. We strike swiftly and fall back if it looks like more than we can handle. Understood. They both mumbled agreement, though Tormund's face suggested he had no intention of turning tail if battle was at hand. The group dispersed, calling out orders, raising alarm that a band would ride at dawn. Jon turned to the battered scouts once more, ensuring the wounded among them were carried off for healing. If the Barrow Fields truly were under siege, they had to hurry. Each hour delayed might mean more innocents lost. That night, the castle swarmed with preparations. Jon tried to sleep but found his mind too racked with scenarios. Instead, he paced the ramparts under the dull moonlight, the wind snatching at his cloak. The guards saluted him. He nodded absently, heart weighed down by the knowledge that tomorrow's sortie could be a turning point, for good or ill. The north was on a knife's edge. Dawn broke pale and cold. Snow had fallen in the night, dusting everything anew. In the courtyard, 200 men assembled, some on horseback, some on foot, with Tormund's wildlings forming a ragged vanguard and Mors's Umbers striding grimly behind. A few knights from lesser houses joined, including Ser Arwood, who insisted on riding out. Jon himself had donned armor beneath heavy furs, Longclaw at his side. He paused to speak with Sam, who hovered near the stable, worry etched on his face. "Jon, be careful," Sam implored, voice trembling. "You don't know how many are out there. Let Mors and Tormund handle it. You're the king. If you fall, the cause might collapse." Jon laid a hand on Sam's shoulder. "A king can't hide behind walls while his men risk their lives. I'll not ride in the front lines, but I'll be there to command. Don't worry, Sam. The gods are with us." Sam swallowed, nodding reluctantly. "I'll continue the search for any records that might help with supplies or tactics. Good luck, Jon." Jon smiled faintly. "You've always been my truest friend." Then he swung into the saddle. Ghost bounded up, red eyes bright with anticipation. The gate yawned open. Jon spurred his horse forward, leading the column out of Winterfell's protective walls. They set a brisk pace south by southwest, crossing half-frozen streams and winding around drifts that rose to a horse's belly. The sky was a dull pewter, clouds swirling as if more snow might soon fall. Tormund and the wildlings ranged ahead, scouting for footprints or signs of recent passage. Mors and his Umbers formed the bulk in the center, with a rearguard of knights and Glover men. Jon rode near the front, but not at the very tip. He was determined to lead yet not expose himself to the earliest arrow. The day stretched on, the wind picking up. Sentries at intervals reported no immediate sign of the Bolton host. They passed through farmland that looked deserted, black chimneys rising from cottages half buried in snow. Once, they found a family hiding in a barn, too terrified to venture out. They told Tormund that a large body of soldiers had indeed passed by days prior, heading deeper into the Barrow Fields. "They had the flayed man banner," said a trembling father of 3. "We saw them burn the neighbor's place. Then they left. Thank the gods they didn't come here." Jon directed them to head for Winterfell if they could manage. With a small push of courage, the family agreed to try, bundling themselves in cloaks and steering a rickety cart. Tormund watched them depart, expression unreadable. "We'll put an end to this," Jon muttered. "We must." They pressed on, entering the wide expanse of the Barrow Fields by mid-afternoon. Large mounds dotted the landscape, ancient burial sites of the first men. Sparse, gnarled trees broke the monotony of snowdrifts. The wind howled unobstructed, carving ridges into the white. Not a single living soul was visible. Felt like a lonely graveyard. Jon kept scanning the horizon. Still no sign of the enemy. As dusk approached, they found a vantage atop one of the barrows. Tormund and Mors joined Jon there, squinting into the distance. The sun's last rays lit the fields in a pale orange. Tormund grunted. "Should we camp or push further? We've men who can keep going, but the horses might founder in the dark." Jon hesitated. "If the enemy's out there, we risk stumbling into them unprepared. Better to make a secure camp on higher ground. We can set sentries all around. Then come morning, we'll resume the search or set up an ambush." Mors rubbed his thick beard. "Agreed. We'll camp, but keep watch for fires. If the Boltons burn something in the night, we might see the glow." They descended, choosing a spot between two barrows where the wind was somewhat cut off. Tents rose in the twilight, men huddling around small fires that gave scant warmth. Ghost prowled the perimeter, nose to the ground. Jon could feel a collective tension, the unspoken dread of encountering a larger force. Tormund's wildlings joked loudly to mask their nerves, while the umbers only grew more silent. Night settled, starless behind roiling clouds. Jon ate a ration of hard bread and dried meat, washing it down with watery ale. His breath billowed in the frozen air. He circled the camp, speaking quiet words to the men. Many offered respectful nods, some calling him Your Grace, others simply Jon Stark. He tried to exude confidence for their sakes, though inside he wrestled with uncertain outcomes. At least he thought they were well armed. Swords, axes, some spears. They might manage a decent fight if the Boltons came in smaller numbers. Near midnight, a sentry came running, breath harsh. "My lord," he panted. "Fire. I see fire in the distance, to the west." Jon immediately roused Tormund and Mors, who followed him up the nearest barrow. Sure enough, a faint glow flickered on the horizon. It might have been many miles away, but it was unmistakable. The telltale shimmer of flames against the low clouds. Mors scowled. "So they're out there burning something else. The bastards." Tormund's eyes narrowed. "We could ride now, try to catch them in the act." Jon considered the darkness, the bitter cold. "We'd be moving blind across unknown terrain. We might blunder into them or arrive too late. Or it could be a ploy to draw us out at night. Let's do this carefully. We can send a small scouting party, 15 riders, maybe. They approach quietly, see what's going on, and return. Then at first light, we decide." It was a cautious plan, but caution seemed wise. Mors volunteered to lead the scouts, being well accustomed to night hunts. Jon trusted him, and Tormund grumbled about missing potential glory, though he did not protest. Mors selected a dozen umbers and a few wildlings, departing within the hour. The rest of the camp settled into uneasy waiting, eyes fixed westward where the glow persisted. Jon tried to rest, but each time he closed his eyes, he imagined villagers screaming amidst flames. By the time exhaustion overtook him, it was near dawn. He woke to the crunch of boots as Mors returned, looking grim and frostbitten. The men who came with him wore hollow expressions. "It was a hamlet," Mors reported. "Couldn't have been more than 20 souls living there. They're dead or fled. We found fresh corpses, half-burned. The Bolton riders moved on, maybe 100 strong at that spot. But we saw tracks suggesting a larger host beyond the hills, close to 400. Hard to say in the dark. They're not far, maybe a few hours' ride west." Jon's jaw clenched. "Then we have to act. They'll keep burning every settlement they find." Tormund slapped his chest. "We can kill them, Crow. 400 or so, you said? We have 200, but we can surprise them. We're on higher ground. If we strike at dawn, we might catch them while they're scattered or not expecting an attack from behind." Mors raised a cautionary hand. "We saw no sign of additional forces, but that doesn't guarantee they're not out there. Still, if we hesitate, they'll keep slaughtering." Jon looked out at the eastern sky, where the first faint color heralded sunrise. Courage stirred in his chest. "We ride. We can't let them continue. But we must do it smartly. Half our men on horseback, half on foot. The riders flank them, the foot approaches from another angle. We attack swiftly, sow confusion, and break them before they can form ranks." Mors and Tormund nodded, each set on retribution. Within minutes, the camp was tearing down tents in a rush, men saddling horses or taking up arms with grim determination. John could feel the tension humming in the air like a bowstring drawn taut. There was no turning back now. They set out westward just as the sun broke the horizon, a pale disk in a gray sky. Snow glittered underfoot. Ghost loped alongside John's horse, ears forward. Tormund led the vanguard again. Moors rode with a separate flank group, and John tried to keep an overview, coordinating the columns. The land rolled gently, dotted by barrows, half-buried fences, and the occasional cluster of leafless trees. They advanced quietly, speaking in low tones. In the distance, faint wisps of smoke still rose where the hamlet had burned. Near mid-morning, a rider at the forefront signaled a halt. He pointed to a thin line of black figures moving across a broad valley a few hundred yards away. John guided his horse up a small rise for a better view. Indeed, the Bolton host was in sight. A column of riders and footmen, trailed by wagons, perhaps loot from the hamlet. Their banners displayed the flayed man, though the wind twisted them so they flickered in and out of view. John guessed their numbers might be around 300 or 400, as the scouts had said. The terrain was open, but the barrows offered some places for cover. Tormund's grin was savage. "They've no idea we're here." John's pulse quickened. "We'll split. Tormund, take 50 horse and circle north behind that ridge. Moors, you do the same with another 50 to the south. Attack from both flanks. The rest of us, about 100, will strike head-on once you're engaged. We want them in disarray, pinned between 3 fronts." Moors slapped a fist to his chest. "Aye, King John." They moved swiftly to execute the plan. Tormund and Moors each led their flanking forces, disappearing behind ridges. John waited with the main body, scanning the valley below. The Boltons marched without urgency, as if their rampage was unstoppable. Anxiety gnawed at John. If the enemy had hidden outriders, or if reinforcements lurked unseen, this could turn disastrous. But there was no more time to second-guess. The soft crunch of snow under restless horses filled the silence. Then, from the northern ridge, came a sudden yell. Tormund's men charged downhill with savage war cries, brandishing axes and spears. The Bolton column jolted into confusion. Swords flashed as the flank scattered. Almost immediately, Moors's force thundered in from the south, equally fierce. From where John watched, it was chaos. Men in flayed man tabards reeling under the onslaught, some trying to form a shield wall, others mounting horses in panic. John unsheathed Longclaw. "Advance!" he roared. The 100 men behind him unleashed a cheer. They swept forward as one, plunging straight toward the enemy's center. Ghost bounded ahead, a white blur across the snow. The crash of steel against steel resonated across the valley. The Bolton forces, though caught off guard, were not without discipline. Some ranks held firm, bracing spears at Tormund's charge, while a knot of crossbowmen tried to line up shots. John galloped toward them, leaning low over his horse's neck. A crossbow bolt hissed past, nearly grazing his ear. He felt the burn of it skim his cheek. Then he was among them, Longclaw flashing. A Bolton soldier gasped as John's blade split through leather and mail. Another lunged at John's horse, but Ghost sprang on him, teeth ripping at his throat. All around, the ring of battle enclosed them. The umbers hammered into the flank. Tormund's wildlings hooped as they broke through a cluster of foot soldiers. Blood stained the pristine snow. Shouts, screams, and the neigh of horses fused into a cacophony. John guided his horse deeper into the melee, searching for any sign of the enemy commander. His men pressed in behind him, ferocious in their momentum. A throng of Bolton swordsmen rallied around a banner. John urged his horse forward, slashing to clear a path. Steel clashed on steel. He parried a blow aimed at his torso, countering with a savage thrust that caught the foe in the chest. Warm blood spattered across John's gloves. In the midst of the fray, a tall Bolton captain in partial plate bellowed, "Hold, you curs! Stand and fight!" He brandished a long sword, trying to restore order. John angled toward him, heart pounding. Their eyes locked across the swirl of chaos. The captain recognized John's sigil. He snarled something lost in the din, raising his sword in challenge. John spurred his horse. Their blades collided with a clang that jarred his arms. The Bolton captain struck again, forcing John to swerve in the saddle. Ghost leapt from the side, but the captain sidestepped, lashing out with a boot that caught the direwolf's flank. Ghost yelped, momentarily off balance. The man turned back to John, a sneer twisting his lips. He swung a vicious overhand blow that John parried awkwardly, the force nearly unseating him. Pain lanced up John's arm. Fighting through it, he twisted Longclaw free and slashed across the captain's breastplate, sparks flying. The plate dented but did not give. The captain tried another cut at John's leg, but John jerked his horse aside. The man's blade whistled through empty air. With a fierce cry, John rose in his stirrups and brought Longclaw down in an arc. The Valyrian steel edge bit through the top of the captain's helm, cleaving skull with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed, and the man sagged with a gurgle. John yanked the blade free, chest heaving. Ghost sprang in to finish the kill, but the captain was already gone, toppling to the crimson snow. Around them, Bolton men began to break, seeing their leader fall. Some tried to flee north, others south, but Tormund and Mors's forces hemmed them in, cutting off escape routes. Panic spread among their ranks. A cry of surrender rang out from a cluster of Bolton footmen who threw down their weapons, dropping to their knees. Another group continued to fight, cornered near the wagons. The wildlings showed no mercy there, hacking until the last defender crumpled. Within minutes, it was over. The field lay strewn with bodies, a patchwork of red on white. The smell of blood and fear hung thick. John reined in his horse, surveying the carnage with a grim expression. Ghost limped slightly, favoring one hind leg. "Ghost," John called, dismounting quickly and rushing to the direwolf's side. He inspected the wound, a gash in Ghost's flank, shallow but bleeding. John ran a gloved hand gently over the wound. "I'm sorry, boy." Ghost whined low in his throat, licking John's hand. At least it didn't seem mortal. John would have the healers tend to him soon. Around them, Tormund hooped in victory, lifting a bloodied axe. Mors was more subdued, panting heavily, eyes scanning for any sign of hidden foes. A handful of Bolton survivors had surrendered, kneeling with hands behind their heads, trembling. John forced himself to adopt the mantle of a commander. "Round them up," he ordered. "Separate those who surrendered from those too wounded to move. We'll see to the wounded. We are not butchers." He cast a glance at Tormund's wildlings, who were collecting trophies from the dead. "Leave the bodies. We'll burn them the same as ours. We can't risk the dead rising." His men obeyed, beginning the grim tasks of battlefield cleanup. The wagons contained stolen goods, grain, clothing, a few valuables, likely pillaged from the hamlets. They found no living villagers among them, just signs of cruelty. Tormund grimaced, shaking his head. "Flayers, the lot of them. I say we flay them in return." John's lips pressed into a hard line. "We won't become them. We'll judge them. If they committed murder, the penalty is death. But we won't stoop to their methods." Tormund spat on the ground, clearly unsatisfied. Yet he relented, muttering curses under his breath. Mors came up, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "We lost a few men, but not as many as I feared. That was a fine victory. It'll send a message to Bolton." John gazed at the scattered corpses, the smoke drifting from the near horizon where the hamlet once stood. "It's a step, but Roose Bolton has more men than this. We can't grow complacent." Mors nodded heavily. "Aye, we should head back to Winterfell before nightfall. No sense lingering in the open if a larger force is near." John agreed. With the battle ended, they tended to the wounded. A few of John's men lay moaning in the snow, others fell silent forever. By the time they sorted the living from the dead, well over half the Bolton force lay in heaps. Perhaps 24 had surrendered, trembling at the mercy of their captors. Another few dozen had fled on horseback or foot, scattering across the fields. Jon knew they would carry news of this defeat back to Roose. Let him know the North was not idle. They set the bodies aflame in a wide pyre, so the whites could not claim them. The macabre smell of burning flesh stung their nostrils. Dusk was nearing by the time they finished. Laden with what supplies they could salvage, and escorting a line of Bolton prisoners bound and guarded, they turned back east toward Winterfell. Victory weighed on them like a burden, a necessary slaughter that would slow Bolton's terror, but not end it. Jon felt none of the exultation that some warriors claimed to find in triumph. He only felt relief that they had saved the Barrow Fields from further devastation. As they rode, Tormund turned to Jon. "You fought well, Crow. That big one in the helm nearly took your head. But you showed him. We gave them a taste of real northern steel." Jon touched the shallow cut on his cheek, dried blood flaking off. "War is never glorious, Tormund. But we did what had to be done." The wildling shrugged. I'm a simpler man than you. I like to see the flayed men fall." Still, a measure of respect underlay his jesting tone. When they reached Winterfell late that night, exhausted and battered, the courtyard buzzed with relief at their success. Sam hurried to greet them, letting out a breath of thanks on seeing Jon alive. Ghost was taken to the healers, who cleaned and bound the wound on his flank. The prisoners were shoved into a makeshift cell, guarded closely by Umbers who had no love for any man wearing flayed man sigils. In the dim glow of torches, Mors and Jon gave a succinct report to those who waited. Ed Tollett, Gilwood Glover, a handful of knights. "We crushed a host of 400, Jon concluded. "They'll not trouble the Barrow Fields again soon. But Bolton's main strength likely remains at the Dreadfort. We must be ready for his counterstroke." A subdued cheer rose, men gladdened by the day's outcome. Yet Jon saw the fatigue in their faces, heard the unspoken question. How many more battles before the Boltons were ended? He had no easy answers. After dismissing them to get much-needed rest, he trudged through the battered halls. Snow drifted in through cracks in the walls. The air smelled of sweat, blood, and horse. Victory was a fleeting balm in this cruel winter. He found a quiet moment in his chambers, stripping off his armor, muscles aching. Sam arrived soon after, anxiously checking Jon's cheek wound, pressing him to let a maester's apprentice see to it. Jon relented, still mindful that the simplest cut could fester in these conditions. Sam spoke softly as he swabbed the cut with an herbal wash. "Everyone's grateful you returned safely. You look exhausted, though." Jon gave a slight nod. "I feel it, but this is only the start. We keep the Boltons at bay for now. The real challenge is to unify the rest of the North. Then we face the Lannisters or the Freys or the White Walkers. Some days I wonder if it's all too much." Sam's expression gentled. "You're doing what has to be done, Jon. Think of how many lives you've spared by stopping those raiders. That's reason enough." Jon allowed a tired smile. "Maybe so. Thank you, Sam." As he said the words, a wave of bone-deep weariness hit him. The day's violence weighed on his soul, but he clung to the knowledge that the North was rallying. Manderley, Umber, Mormont, Glover, one by one the houses turned back to the direwolf. Perhaps that momentum would carry them through the wars ahead. And if not, Jon thought bleakly, at least he would face them with honor. For now, he closed his eyes and let Sam finish cleaning the wound, praying for a few hours of rest before the next storm descended. Days passed in a tense swirl. Refugees arrived in greater numbers, some from villages near the White Knife, others from the Western Front. Winterfell began to resemble a crowded haven rather than a strictly martial outpost. Men hammered day and night, patching holes in the ramparts, reinforcing gates, building new storage for provisions. The place bustled with urgency, a sense that war was upon them. Ravens came and went. Some brought news from White Harbor. Lord Wyman was nearly ready to march. Others hinted that smaller houses, like the Locks and Flints, might be sending men. Still no word from Carhold or Bear Island. A fresh snippet of hope arrived one morning when a pair of Mormont warriors strode through Winterfell's gates, claiming to be scouts. They said Lady Dacey was en route with 200 spears, planning to gather at Winterfell within a fortnight. Rumor was that Bear Island had defied a small incursion by Ironborn raiders, driving them off their shores. Dacey's fierce leadership was forging a path south. Jon felt relief wash over him. The Mormonts would help tilt the balance. But with each new ally or glimmer of optimism, the specter of Roose Bolton loomed. Sporadic skirmishes occurred on distant roads. Bolton outriders still prowled. A few more villages burned. It seemed clear that Bolton waited for the right moment, letting smaller detachments test Jon's forces. Each day, Jon convened with Tormund, Mors, and the others to finalize when and how they would strike once the allied hosts arrived. White Harbor might approach from the east, he Mormonts from the northwest, possibly meeting at or near Winterfell for a united front. Then they would challenge Bolton directly, perhaps even lay siege to the Dreadfort if necessary. A risky plan in the heart of winter, but little choice remained. Amid these preparations, a new letter from the Night's Watch arrived. Bowen Marsh had penned it, short and urgent. More white sightings, deeper forays by the dead near Eastwatch. The watch had too few men to patrol effectively. Marsh beseeched Jon for immediate aid, but also chided him for abandoning the watch's vow. Jon's heart twisted reading it. The realm had turned so that even men sworn to defend all from the darkness squabbled over words. He felt Sam's presence behind him as he read, silent yet supportive. Jon could do nothing but vow once again to hurry, but they weren't ready. The Boltons would exploit any weakness. He prayed the others would remain in the far north a while longer. The days wore on, blending into nights. Snow fell ceaselessly, drifting against the newly repaired walls. Tormund led another small raid to chase off Bolton outriders. The Umbers patrolled the farmland, bringing in what meager harvest they could find. More refugees trickled in. The Great Hall was converted partly into a shelter. Rooms that once housed noble guests now crammed entire families. Sam assisted the makeshift maester's apprentice in tending injuries. Ser Arwood oversaw daily drills, forging men of disparate backgrounds into some semblance of an army. Slowly but surely, Winterfell became the hub of a northern coalition. Then, one afternoon, shouts echoed from the gates. Jon emerged to see a single rider galloping in, cloak tattered, horse lathered. The man collapsed from the saddle. Soldiers rushed to help him up, asking his name and business. Jon waded through the gathering crowd. Snow whipped about them, stinging eyes and cheeks. The rider coughed violently, blood staining his lips. He gasped, "Lady Alice Karstark needs help. Karhold attacked. She's pinned down. Sent me to ask for reinforcements." His eyes rolled back, and he fell limp in the snow. A hush of dread enveloped the courtyard. Several men hoisted the messenger up, carrying him inside. Jon's stomach churned. Alice had departed weeks ago, determined to sway her uncle, or at least rally loyal Karstarks. Had Roose moved against Karhold directly, or had her uncle betrayed her? The questions came in a torrent. Mors exhaled, face grim. Gods, if Karhold is under attack, that means Bolton's not just waiting. He's making a move to crush potential allies before they join us. Jon turned to Tormund, whose eyes glinted with anger. We can't abandon Alice to her fate. If we lose Karhold, we lose the eastern approach. We also lose a loyal house, but it's leagues away in the deep winter. Getting a sizable force there in time might be nigh impossible. Tormund spat. Impossible is just another challenge. We go or she dies. That's how it is. Jon set his jaw. Another decision, another splitting of forces? They had to protect Winterfell, yet they couldn't let Alice and her loyal men fall. Mors, Jon said. Gather what you can, perhaps 100 men. I'll lead them if needed. Tormund, you remain here to help hold Winterfell. If Bolton hits us while we're gone, you can't let him take the castle. But Tormund's expression hardened. I want to fight, Snow. Enough waiting behind walls. Let me come to Karhold. Jon shook his head. I need you to keep watch over Winterfell's defenses. If the Manderleys arrive and I'm not here, Someone must coordinate them. The last thing we need is confusion when a big host shows up. Tormund scowled, but he could see the sense. Fine, but bring your best men. The road to Karhold is no easy ride in this snow, and if Bolton's men are already there, you'll face a siege or a pitched battle. Jon looked to Mors. Have the Umbers scrounge up horses, supplies. We leave at dawn. If we push hard, we might reach Karhold in 4 or 5 days. He paused, dread curling in his gut. Pray that Lady Alice can hold out that long. As men rushed to prepare for yet another sortie, Sam approached Jon, wringing his hands. Jon, you can't fight on every front at once, he fretted. If you keep dividing your forces, there's no choice, Jon said gently. Alice Karstark risked her life to secure her house for us. I won't abandon her. We have enough men now at Winterfell to hold, especially once Manderley arrives. I must do this. He looked down, remembering the innocence in Alice's eyes, her determination to preserve her family's loyalty to House Stark. He would not forsake her. Besides, he continued quietly, we need Karhold. We need every stronghold that stands with us. If Bolton seizes it, our position grows weaker. Sam stared at him, searching for words, then merely nodded. Then I'll pray for the old gods and the new to keep you safe. Jon placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. Thank you, Sam. Keep these people safe in my absence. That night was a blur of frantic organization. Sledges were prepared to carry extra rations. Mors recruited a mix of Umbers, Karstark volunteers left at Winterfell, and some of Tormund's wildlings who insisted on going. Ghost still favored his injured leg, but he refused to be left behind, trailing Jon at every turn. They would have about 150 men in total. Enough, Jon hoped, to break any siege at Karhold or at least reinforce Alice inside the walls. As dawn broke over Winterfell, Jon mounted once again, feeling the wear of perpetual battle in his bones. Tormund stood by the gate, arms folded, a concerned scowl etched on his face. Remember, Tormund said, Bolton might try something tricksy. Watch your back, Crow. I want you coming home alive. Jon summoned a smile. I'll do my best. He reined in his horse, turning to the assembled men. Their breath steamed in the icy morning. Then, with a final nod, he spurred the mount forward, leading them out of Winterfell's gates once more. Snow crunched under hooves, the wind sighed against battered banners, and the uncertain path to Karhold lay ahead. A final piece in the puzzle of uniting the North before they could challenge Roose Bolton's rule once and for all. Behind them, Winterfell shrank in the distance, a gray fortress in a sea of white. Ahead, the horizon promised countless perils. But Jon Snow, king in the North by Robb Stark's will, rode unflinching, determination in his every breath. The time for caution had passed. Now was the hour to save what remained of the old loyalties, to bind the North together, and to stand as the wolves of winter. And as ever, in the back of Jon's mind, a deeper chill whispered of the threat that loomed beyond the wall, a final storm that would make mortal wars seem like children's quarrels. He pressed on, forging hope from duty, refusing to yield even an inch to despair. For the dead would not wait, and neither would the living who clung to his banner. He was a Stark, bastard name or no, and a Stark does not abandon the North. So he rode, unbowed, beneath a sullen sky, ghostly flakes drifting on the wind, a silent vow echoing in his heart, that before the dawn of spring, this war, this legacy, would be decided once and for all.